Well, as you know, there is no conspiracy. Everything just happens by accident. You know, that's why OBE, you have these change agents going from state to state, carpetbaggers, getting state legislatures and Supreme Courts overnight, mandating education reform in the OBE model. And it's all by accident, of course. It has nothing to do with any planning. There's no planning behind it, no ulterior motives, although they lie through their teeth, as they do here in Texas. And I don't know how you can possibly trust these educators who lie so blatantly, as was so clearly demonstrated earlier today. They lie. They cheat. And then they want you to put your children in their hands. How can you possibly do that to your children? To put your children in the hands of liars. Well, I've done a lot of digging into this thing. I've always wanted to know what's behind all of this. What is behind it? And recently there appeared in the London Sunday Telegraph a lengthy article about Britain's secret education establishment. It was revealed that since 1941, the shadowy group known as the All Souls Group, and representing some of the most powerful people in the world of British education, had been meeting 3 times a year in an oak-paneled room at Oxford University. The article states, many believe it is here rather than at the Department of Education that crucial questions about schools are raised. One member who did not want to be named said the group had caused frustration to successive education secretaries. Anyone who discloses details of who was present or what was said risks being blackballed. No minutes are kept, no papers or public statements ever emerge, and the membership list has never before been published. They are protected by Chatham House rules, which dictate proceedings are off the record. Those who do not share the group's left-wing views are occasionally invited to speak, but rarely receive a sympathetic hearing. Now, does such an exclusive, secretive education establishment exist in the United States? Undoubtedly. That's the reason why President Reagan could not abolish the Department of Education, and why conservatives in the department were pressured out of their positions the moment they started to do anything threatening to the establishment. Who are they at the top of the controlling group? The top foundation heads like Ernest Boyer, top professors of education like John Goodlad, Bill Spady, and Ted Sizer, and top educational operatives in the state and federal governments. They are the ones who decide on policy and coordinate its implementation throughout the United States and provide the funding for it. Otherwise, how explain the implementation of outcome-based education in state after state as if orchestrated by a central control? How explain the widespread use of whole language in teaching reading when we know that it produces crippled readers? How explain this orchestrated hostility against intensive phonics among educators? As for the actual formation of an education establishment in the U.S., it seems to have started with a confidential meeting called the Cleveland Conference, organized in 1915 by Professor Charles Judd, head of the University of Chicago School of Education. Judd got his PhD at Leipzig under Professor Wilhelm Wundt, and he spearheaded a movement to reform education in the psycho-progressive mold. David Tyack writes in his book, Managers of Virtue, quote, Judd had a vision that both the structure of the schools and the curriculum needed radical revision, but that change would take place in the haphazard fashion that has characterized our school history unless some group gets together and undertakes in a cooperative way to coordinate reforms, unquote. Judd urged the members of the Cleveland Conference to jump into the breach and undertake the positive and aggressive task of a detailed reorganization of the materials of instruction in schools of all grades. And all of that is documented. All you have to do is go to your library and you'll find the full year-by-year documentation of how that wholesale revision was engineered by these educators. Among the 19 members, it was his protege, Judd's protege, William Scott Gray, who produced the Dick and Jane Look-Say reading program that began America's downward slide into illiteracy. And the reason why they have to dumb us down is if the kids can't read the Bible or the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, they are totally, dependent on TV. And, of course, then they can be easily manipulated by the powers that be, by the elite. Among the 19 members who attended the first Cleveland Conference were James R. Angle, a Leipzig alumnus who became president of the University of Chicago and later president of Yale, Leonard Ayers, director of the Russell Sage Foundation, Abraham Flexner of the Rockefeller Foundation, Paul Haynes, director of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Paul Monroe, founder of the World Federation of Education Associations, Edward L. Thorndike, father of educational psychology at Teachers College, and Elwood P. Cubberley of Stanford University School of Education. So you see the top people. See, what we're dealing with something that's been engineered by the top educators in America, not your local school, not your local teachers, but by the very top people in this country, the heads of foundations, the heads of university departments. They're the ones who are behind all of this. Among others who joined in later years were Lyman Bryson of CBS, John Gardner of the Carnegie Corporation, and James Brown Conant of Harvard University, and Ralph Tyler of Stanford, whose pioneering work in psychological testing helped Benjamin Bloom design outcome-based education. Incidentally, Tyler died earlier this year. He was 92. These people managed to live very long lives. He spent 70 years behind the scenes. You've never heard of Ralph Tyler. I had never heard of him until about a year or two ago when I read Beverly Eckman's book, Educating for the New World Order. But he was the man behind the scenes creating all of these psychological tests. He's a legend among those people who have been engineering all of this. David Tyack writes, quote, having no constitution, no minutes, no officers, save a factotum, no bylaws, no public life, the conference was described in 1949 as a club whose sole object is to make it possible for 40 or 50 men to meet once a year and talk about whatever they are interested in for 10 or a dozen hours in session and an unpredictable number of hours in lobbies or bedrooms. Members had a chance to learn about the news behind the news, to get to know leaders in a variety of fields, to share information about new educational programs or jobs or foundation grants or new government programs or regulations. When the Commonwealth Fund decided to give large sums of for educational research, for example, its officer, Max Farrand, outlined the funding program to conference members first. So the educators have this pipeline to this foundation money, and that's where it all happens. You see, this is, if this were done by business people, you would call it a cartel. They'd be in jail. But it's being done among the educators, you see, but that's okay, you see. And now you know why the education establishment is so unresponsive to parental wishes and why the only educational alternatives for parents is to get their children out of the government schools and into homeschooling or a decent private school. Incidentally, the Chatham House rules mentioned in the Sunday Telegraph, which means that all proceedings are off the record, refers to Chatham House, the home of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the British counterpart of our Council on Foreign Relations. And Oxford, where the All Souls group meets, is also where Bill Clinton studied on his Rhodes Scholarship. The scholarships were founded by Cecil Rhodes, who made his fortune in gold and diamond mining in South Africa in the 1880s, and formed a secret society in 1891 with an elite membership to promote the interests of the British Empire. Professor Carol Quigley, Bill Clinton's mentor at Georgetown University, wrote a book about the secret society entitled The Anglo-American Establishment. Quigley wrote, quote, "The Rhodes Scholarships established by the terms of Cecil Rhodes' seventh will are known to everyone. What is not so widely known is that Rhodes in 5 previous wills left his fortune to form a secret society which was to devote itself to the preservation and expansion of the British Empire. And what does not seem to be known to anyone is that this secret society was created by Rhodes and his principal trustee, Lord Milner, and continues to this day." And there's no question about it, continues to this day, because they're still giving out Rhodes Scholarships. The group, unquote, let me go back to the quote. "The scholarships, according to Quigley, were merely a facade to conceal the secret society. Or more accurately, they were to be one of the instruments by which the members of the secret society could carry out his purpose." In other words, he talks about the British Empire, but what they were really out was for the New World Order, for a world government. And the only way that they could get future leaders was through this scholarship. The Rhodes Scholarship was a means of identifying those individuals in the various English-speaking countries who would be the future leaders. And an article about Cecil Rhodes in the Boston Globe of February 14th, 1993 remarked, quote, "Cecil John Rhodes would have been delighted at the news that Bill Clinton is President of the United States. For Rhodes specifically intended his scholarships for young men who have shown during school days that they have instincts to lead and esteem the performance of public duties as their highest aim. Moreover, he would have been particularly pleased that a Rhodes Scholar was in charge of an administration that included a sizable contingent of his boys," unquote. According to in the first years of the scholarships, few Americans applied because you had to know Greek and Latin. But these prerequisites were eventually dropped. Today, the selection process is conducted by committees of past Rhodes Scholars in different states and regions. According to the Globe, quote, "These review the applications and interview the most promising applicants. Prospective scholars describe the interviews as hard but fair. Questions can range from fields of study to more personal challenges," unquote. What kind of careers do Rhodes Scholars choose when they return to the United States? A survey of the first 25 years of scholars found that 33% became educators, 24% lawyers, 13% businessmen, 8% doctors, and only 6% went into government service. Nowadays, twice as many Rhodes Scholars are entering government service or foundation work. Some of the Rhodes Scholars who have achieved a modicum of notoriety are J. William Fulbright, 1925, U.S. Senator from Arkansas. Daniel J. Boorstin, 1934, Librarian of Congress. Walt W. Rostow, 1936, National Security Advisor. Byron R. White, Supreme Court Justice. Nicholas Katzenbach, U.S. Attorney General. Stansfield Turner, Director of the CIA. Guido Calabresi, Dean of the Yale Law School. Neil Rudenstein, President of Harvard. Jonathan Kozol, left-wing author and admirer of Fidel Castro, whose book on illiteracy says nothing about the cause of our illiteracy problem. Lester Thoreau, liberal economist at MIT. David Souter, U.S. Supreme Court Justice. David Boren, U.S. Senator. Richard Lugar, U.S. Senator. Paul Sarbanes, U.S. Senator. Bill Bradley, U.S. Senator. Robert Reich, Secretary of Labor. George Stephanopoulos, Clinton's spokesperson. And Thomas F. Birmingham, Massachusetts State Senator, who sponsored and promoted Massachusetts OBE reform bill. Also, you have Strobe Talbot, Ira Magaziner, and God knows how many others in the Clinton administration. In other words, being a Rhodes Scholar catapults you immediately into power, you see. That's the great incentive, you see. If you want immediate power, powerful position, you toe the line and you become a Supreme Court judge. You become a senator. You see, the way is smoothed out for you. As you will notice, there isn't a true conservative among them. All of them, to some degree or another, are promoting the agenda of the New World Order. According to Malachi Martin, the pagan free market New World Order is merely one of three forces vying for hegemony over the human race. He writes in his book, The Keys of This Blood, quote, "Willing or not, ready or not, we are all involved in an all-out, no-holds-barred, three-way global competition. Most of us are not competitors, however. We are the stakes, for the competition is about who will establish the first one-world system of government that has ever existed in the Society of Nations. The competition is all out because now that it has started, there is no way it can be reversed or called off. No holes are barred because once the competition has been decided, the world and all that's in it, our way of life as individuals and as citizens of the nations, our families and our jobs, our trade and commerce and money, our educational systems and our religions and our cultures, even the badges of our national identity, which most of us have always taken for granted, all will have been powerfully and radically altered forever. No one can be exempted from its effects. No sector of our lives will remain untouched. The competition began and continues as a three-way affair because that is the number of rivals with sufficient resources to establish and maintain a new world order. Indeed, the three rivals themselves speak about this new world order not as something around a distant corner of time, but as something that is imminent, as a system that will be introduced and installed in our midst by the end of this final decade of the second millennium. And that's why we have this acceleration. Everything is being accelerated, as you see, through education. Wherever you look, everything's been speeded up. Why? 2000 is their big number. That's the year. They want to sew this thing up. Cecil Rhodes said it would take at least 100 years. He thought it might take 200 years, but these people want to, get it to that far. Now, who are the three contenders? Martin sees the first as Christian civilization based on biblical morality and values. He sees the Catholic Church as the last remaining worldwide stronghold of these values, because they have a worldwide system, and of course, he sees the church's opposition to abortion in the face of fierce secular humanist pressures, their opposition to females as priests, etc., indicates that it has not abandoned moral absolutes. You see, that's where you have to see where the church stands, the Catholic Church. If they cave in on any of those, then of course they're surrendering. But they haven't. It's amazing that the Pope has remained adamant on these. The second contender is communism, which is by no means dead. In fact, recent events in Russia attest to the enduring power of the communist establishment, which is about to put a stop to the free market privatization process. Well, they may not succeed in that entirely, but Gorbachev has become head of a new world organization called the Green Cross, which has as its aim an ecologically safe future for mankind. In other words, the communists now are going ecological. They're becoming green instead of red, you see. In an interview in Parade magazine of January 23, 1994, Gorbachev said, "The Green Cross is in its infancy, but is already drawing strong support. We need a global focus. We have to change our values. We have to educate people. Educational systems all over the world must take up this task. International codes of law must be developed, and the practical work of environmental cleanup must be undertaken. We recognize that we will learn as we go. There is no clear answer except that the old ideologies of our civilization must give way to the new challenges of our civilization. The growing environmental movement in the world must be the vehicle for that." So you see, it's the new age, the new paradigm. We have to get rid of Christianity. Note the use of the Green Cross as an ecological symbol. It's great marketing went on in that choice. Concerning the third contender, Martin writes, the final contender in the competition for the New World Order is not a single individual leader of a single institution or territory. It is a group of men who are united as one power, mind, and will for the purpose of achieving a single common goal, to be victorious in the competition for the new global hegemony. While the acknowledged public leader and spokesman for this group is the current American president, the contenders who compose this assemblage of individuals are Americans and Europeans who, taken together, represent every nation in the Western Democratic Alliance. Unremittingly globalist in their vision and their activities, these individuals operate from two principal power bases. The first is the power base of finance, industry, and technology. Entrepreneurial in their occupations, the men in this phalanx qualify themselves and are often referred to by others as transnationalists in their outlook. Members of the second phalanx of this group of globalist contenders, internationalists as they are frequently called, bring with them invaluable experience in government, intergovernmental relationships, and the rarefied art of international politics. And of course, there you have the monopoly capitalists, those who want to sew it up all for themselves, which is what the Federal Reserve Bank became, a cartel for the major banks. That's all the Federal Reserve is. It's a cartel. And what they want to do is cartelize these big players want to cartelize the globe. That's why you're going to have this, you're not going to have the kind of competition that free enterprise has. You're going to have the kind of a new sort of managed competition, you see. So you have to understand that what is taking place in American education today is a direct result of decisions being made at the top by those planning to lead us into a world government. And that is why whole language and outcome-based education is being imposed in our schools in a carefully planned, orchestrated manner. You see, the purpose of these people is to create a pyramidal society. See, we're going away, we're leaving our democratic republic, and we're headed for a pyramidal society. Now, what's a pyramidal society? Well, it's a three-tier society. You have the elite at the top. That is the university elite or the universitarian elite. You know, these are the people out of the universities who are now ruling us, you know, the Billerys and Hillarys of this world. They've gone to all the great schools. They've been groomed. You can find them on every top campus in America. They're all being groomed for the elite, you see, at the very top. They are going to rule over us. The second tier, directly below them, are the professionals, the technicians, the CEOs, the anchor persons, you see, the artists, because they will draw their privileges from the elite. And then below them is the mass, the workers, the proles, the drones. And that's how outcome-based education is constructed. You've got 3 certificates in outcome-based education. You have the top certificate that's going to take you to a university. Then you have the professional certificate. And then you have your general mastery certificate, which is for everybody else. And of course, since they're dumbing down everyone else, you will have so many functional illiterates at the bottom there that they will be easily manipulated. And that's the way the system is going to operate. So you'll have your privileged caste at the top, and you're going to do away with mobility, with social mobility, because the people who can't read will not have the means to get up there the way people in past generations had. Immigrants who came to this country learned to read and were able to make it. So we have this 3-tier society that's in the process of being created, and the school system is meant to supply the people for that 3-tier society. And that's why you have the foundations behind it, behind outcome-based education, because that's what they want to create. Those are the kind of people for the New World Order. Now, if you doubt that such an organized group of planners exists, let me quote you several passages from Carroll Quigley's monumental History of Our Time, Tragedy and Hope, published in 1966 when Bill Clinton was one of his students at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And incidentally, Clinton got his Rhodes Scholarship in 1968, 2 years after Quigley wrote his book, Tragedy and Hope. And incidentally, this is what he said. He said, quote, "There does exist and has existed for a generation an international Anglophile network which operates to some extent in the way the radical right believes the communists act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as the round table groups, has no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other groups, and frequently does." You see, that's why now we can understand why the Rockefeller Foundation was financing so many left-wing activities, because they were using the communists, you see. "I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it and to many of its instruments. I have objected both in the past and recently to a few of its policies, but in general my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown, and I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known." So there was Quigley saying, look, I know this group exists. They want to remain unknown, but why? Why don't they come out and say, hey, this is what we want? Of course, if you study what they're doing, you know that that's what they want, but they won't come out and say it. And he says, but they're so important in history. And it was Quigley, of course, who then traced it all back to Cecil Rhodes and his secret society. And one of the most important things that Cecil Rhodes said, and I quoted in one of my newsletters, I don't know if I have that particular one here with me, one of the newsletters that I did on the, I guess it's, but the sentence is simply this. He said, in order for this secret society to succeed in its plan for a new world order, we must gain control of the wealth of the world. We must gain control of the wealth of the world. And he would encourage the very wealthy, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, etc., to put their money in foundations which then could be used to create this new world order. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what they've done. But not only have they done that, but they also were responsible for the Federal Reserve System, which controls our money supply. And also they created the federal income tax. Why? To strip everyone else of whatever wealth they had so that they would have very few resources with which to fight back. Isn't it true that the conservatives, we don't have the money. They've got all the money in the world. And they're using billions from the federal budget now to finance their plan, while we all have to do it out of our own pockets, don't we? You know, how much money do we have? And notice how they waste the money. They deliberately waste the money to make sure that we don't have any to use against them, because they know it takes money to fight money. So it's an ingenious plan. It's an ingenious plan. But they didn't figure on one thing. They did not figure on the revival of Christianity, you see. They didn't realize that when you are on God's side, you've got more than money. You know, that's the most important thing. But they're dealing with that. Why do you think there's so many articles about the religious right? They realize now that we are the principal obstacle to the culmination of their dreams. We are their principal obstacle. And so they've been planning now, how can we defeat the religious right? How can we do it? It's an ingenious plan. Very simple. They realize that 85% of the Christians in America put their children in public schools. And they said, we've got the perfect formula. We will turn their children into pagans. Now, how do you turn a Christian child into a pagan? Well, the first thing is you turn them into an illiterate so he can't read the Bible. That's the first thing. The second thing you do is you sexualize the child as early as possible. That's why now sex education is taught in kindergarten. Do you realize it's now being taught in kindergarten? I sat before a presentation of a human sexuality course that is being given in the schools of Concord, Massachusetts. This is the wonderful Concord of our revolutionary days. K through 12, sex education, starting at the very beginning. Why? Because if you sexualize the kids, they will become sexually active, which happens 85% of the time, and if they become sexually active, they will then be in rebellion against what their Christian parents believe. Now that creates a conflict which is known by the psychologists as cognitive dissonance. See, they have a name for everything. Now what is cognitive dissonance? It's an internal conflict over values that the child now has to deal with. It creates tremendous stress. So the child is given the option, give your choice, make your decision. You can decide whether to obey your parents, your Christianity, and abstain, or you can come over to our side, to humanism, which says, hey, kids, if it feels good, do it, as long as you're using a condom, That's the bait. And how many kids do you think are persuaded to go over into the humanist side, into the New Age side? Every one of these New Age religions are very permissive when it comes to sex and sin. That's why they're so attractive. It's interesting. If you go to any big university town, you will find your occult bookstore, your bookstore that sells New Age literature. Go to any campus. You see, the more intelligent you are, the more attracted you are to these phony solutions. And so New Age is big on campus. It's big in the schools. Witchcraft and all of that, Satanism. I don't have to tell you about that stuff. We've known about that for years. But that's how they intend to defeat you, by taking your children and turning them into pagans. And that's why I tell Christian parents, don't put your children in their hands. There's no other way out, you see. If you are a Christian teacher in a public school, do the best you can to save whomever you can. But your children are not missionaries. This idea that children can be missionaries is ridiculous. It's your responsibility to protect your children against these evil forces, you see, and to protect this heritage of theirs so that you'll be able to pass on the freedoms that were given to you to your children. This is what we're fighting, and this is why the next few years are going to be so crucial, because they are determined to sew it all up by the millennium, by the year 2000. And we are just as determined to stop this whole steamroller, But that's like stopping a train that's going, 100 miles an hour. How do we do that? It's not easy. It's not easy. But from what I heard earlier today, when Janet was speaking, and the kind of reception she said, I thought to myself, why don't they put her in the Astrodome? You see. I mean, Janet can really do a job there. That's what we need. We've got to wake up our neighbors. We've got to let them know there's an awful lot of apathy. A lot of apathy. But this pagan New World Order that they want is not a very healthy place for Christians to be. All you have to do is think of what Hitler did to the Jews. This is what they've got planned for the Christians. I can assure you. You see. So we have to stop them, in the best way that we can, and we can only do that with knowledge. We can only do that by knowing what is going on and being able to stop them. We have an awful lot of information and evidence now about this going on. For example, there was a Reese committee many years ago that investigated the big foundations. Oh, I see, I've just gotten the big zero, which means that it's time is up. So I won't go into this, but if you would like this information that I'm speaking about today, they're in several of my newsletters. One is called Who Controls American Education. A second is called Seize the Road's Legacy. Those two newsletters will give you all the information I'm talking about today on this particular topic. But as I say, it's up to us to stop this juggernaut. We can do it. Thank you. God bless you all. Thank you.